history, there were over 40 black women in that parade. The founders of Delta Sigma Theta and other black women who took their place with their respective states and professions. We were there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to Black Women's History, African American Suffragists and the Struggle for Inclusion. Today promises to be both educational and historical. Historical in the sense that this event bridges Black History Month and Women's History Month in March. I encourage everyone to take a few minutes, and in the hallway there is an exhibit, and explore that exhibit. The exhibit is We Stand on Their Shoulders, and it's about the women's suffrage movement in Wisconsin. So I invite you after the program, please take a few minutes and explore that exhibit. Okay? I am delighted to introduce Laura Jones, who will lead us in singing the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and I would like everyone to please stand.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with the steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way where the tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you, Laura. Please give her another round of applause. That song is so moving. It tells our entire journey in this country. But we will begin at this point with a land acknowledgement that we here in the city of Appleton and the League of Women Voters have been doing throughout 2019. The territory where the city of Appleton is today was traditionally occupied by the Ho-Chunk and the Menominee Indians. The Menominee Nation ceded this land to the United States in the Treaty of the Cedars in 1836, with Chief Oshkosh representing the Menominee. The city of Appleton recognizes the fact that the city of Appleton was built on the homelands, villages of the indigenous peoples of this region, without whom the building of this city would have not been possible. So who is the Fox Valley 19th Amendment Centennial Coalition? We were formed in 2019 with our kickoff event that was held at the PAC in December of that same year. We are a collaboration of women from women-run associations, clubs, and organizations. This group is aligned in the desire to celebrate, educate, and advocate for women's rights. As I call your organization's name, please stand and remain standing until all coalition organizations have been named. AAUW, the American Association of University Women, Appleton Chapter. NUAC, the Northeast Wisconsin Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. I'm already standing, so I'll raise my hand. The League of Women Voters of Appleton. I'm already standing, so I'll raise my hand again. The Midday Women's Alliance. Thank you. Small but mighty in number. And the Women's Fund of the Fox Valley region. Thank you. You may be seated. Give them a round of applause. In addition to this beautiful array of coalition women and our partner groups, the Fox Valley 19th Amendment Centennial Celebration Committee is sponsored by, and we would like to thank the following for funding this heroic project that we have undertaken. So if you are also here, please stand. The Community Foundation of the Fox Valley region, thank you for funding this over-the-top project for over a year. The Community Foundation encompasses the Bright Idea Fund, Chuck and Bob Mary Fund, Silton Family Fox Valley Community Fund, and Dave and Shirley Strange. But you would not have name tags and other things if they did not do that. So thank you very much, Dave and Shirley. You want to stand, please? In-kind support has been provided by Andy Bosters, Vision Navigator, Coalesce Marketing and Design, and are you here? You miracle worker girl. Get that lady right there. You made your programs and all of your inserts happen. Thank you again, Annie. And of course, the History Museum at the Castle, of which we are very happy to announce the women's suffrage exhibit that is in the hallway that we again invite you to participate and take in, as my soror Joy has already invited you to. Today's event, as has already been noted, is being led by my NUEC chapter sorors of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And at this time, I would like to give a special shout out to my chapter soror, Kimberly Watts. Will you please stand? This is the woman who helped us with the design from a marketing standpoint to create the coalition logo and our slogan, her voice, her vote, our victory. Thank you. I now bring to the podium my esteemed chapter president, Madam Chair, Madam President, Janine Calloway, who will make the connection between the women's suffrage movement, Delta, and introduce our speaker. So our President.
Good afternoon. It's so nice to see so many of you in the crowd today. We're excited about this event. As Karen mentioned, my name is Janine Calloway. I have the honor of serving as chapter president for the Northeast Wisconsin Alumni chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Just a little bit of history for you all. Our organization was founded on the campus of Howard University on January 13, 1913 by 22 progressive thinking collegiate women. We have over 300,000 members that make up over 1,000 chapters. The Northeast Wisconsin chapter, we are one of the 7 chapters in the state of Wisconsin. So our chapter, the Northeast chapter, we serve Appleton, Green Bay, Oshkosh, Fond du Lac, and Sheboygan areas. And we have 5 areas in which we focus our programs around. And those 5 areas are economic development, educational development, physical and mental health, international awareness and involvement, and then of course the reason why we're here today, political awareness and involvement. So I wanted to make the connection for you why we are so passionate about this topic and so excited to be involved with so many of you in order to make this happen today. Our founders, they wanted to serve. They wanted to make a difference in the communities that they were in and really all over the world. And in 1913, they didn't know that months after being chartered that they would have an opportunity. They didn't know that there was change in the air. There was a lot of change, but there was very direct and intentional change around women's rights. But when I say that, I want you to know that the lens at that time was the rights of white women, not black women. So despite efforts at that time to not involve black women in the movement and the conversation as it pertained to rights of women, our passion, our willingness allowed us to show up, and we, although we were told that our place was in the back and that we shouldn't have a voice, we still showed up and we took our rightful place in our sorority's first public demonstration of social action as the largest organized group of the few black women bold enough to participate in the Women's Suffrage March held in 1913 on March 3rd. So our founders, they marched alongside of white women that were advocating for rights. And so although, again, we were told not to show up, and if we did show up to be in the back, we showed up and we were right along the side of others that had passion around voter rights. But when you sometimes hear about it, when you read about it, that part of the story is lost. And today we will talk about that part of the story. We will talk about that part of the story. So, we still remain to be forward-thinking as an organization. We still are bold and we are committed to social action and advocacy. And I personally believe that although we have great challenges, I feel like we also have a lot of opportunities. And with everyone's commitment to advocacy, and when I say commitment to advocacy, not advocacy of what you look like or what you're familiar with, but advocacy for all, I feel as if we can create a better environment for us all to live, work, and make progress that benefits us all. So as you hear from our speaker today, I just challenge you to think about what is that one thing that you will share with someone else, or what's that one thing that you will do as a result of hearing the information that's shared with you today. So I'm excited personally to hear from our speaker today. And I don't want to take up too much of her time, so I'll go ahead and read her bio, and you'll also understand why I am excited to hear from her about this topic. So our speaker, her name is Michelle Duster. She's an award-winning author, speaker, and educator. Her professional background includes 2 decades of writing and advertising and marketing communications. She has written, edited, and contributed to 9 books and dozens of articles. She's very active with committees and boards to develop city, state, and national public history projects that focus on the contributions of African Americans. She is from Chicago, so not too far away, and she has worked to honor the legacy of her paternal great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells. She's been involved and supported several efforts to create a major downtown area in Chicago, and also around renaming Ida B. Wells Drive an honorary street, to honor the work that she has done and progress that she's made that many of us benefit from today. She is currently working on a committee to develop a monument, Ida B. Wells Monument, and involved with efforts to create statewide honors to Illinois suffrage. So she has her bachelor's in psychology. She's completed coursework in film and video at Columbia College in Chicago. She has her master's in media study from the New York School in New York City, and she teaches and tutors at the college level. And currently working on a biography of Ida B. Wells and an anthology about activism. So again, I've just read to you a very small insert about her and the different things that she's doing. However, I encourage you to go to her website, and the website is listed in your program, mldrights.com, to find out additional information about the things that she's done and contributions that she's made. So with all of that being said, if you can join me in welcoming Michelle Duster to the stage.
Hi everybody. That was quite an introduction. I'm so overwhelmed right now with all of your hospitality. This is amazing to me. This is the first time that I've ever had a big poster of myself greet me at the door. I'm like, what? So this is rock star treatment. I'm kind of overwhelmed. But thank you, Janine Calloway, for that amazing introduction, and all of the sorority sisters of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and all of the other organizations involved in the 19th Amendment Centennial Coalition. I can tell that you put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate everything that you're doing. So, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Okay, I have to take this off because it's just too weird for me to just stand still for 45 minutes, or actually for 20 minutes or more. Okay, so can everybody see the screen, or is this in the way? Everybody can see it? Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of the suffrage movement, and I only have like an hour, so I can't cover 160 years of history in 1 hour without leaving something out. So please be patient and understanding that I'm giving highlights, and I know we're going to have Q&A afterwards, but also I don't know how many books written about this topic, so if you need more information, then there's other sources. But I'm just going to give you as much information as I can in 60 minutes. So I'm going to be talking about African American suffragists' fight for inclusion. I'm going to cover the fight for black women to be included in the suffrage movement itself. And then fast forward to today, 2020, of the fight for inclusion of African American suffragists in today's commemorations and tributes. And I am very involved in this part because I'm alive right now. So I can talk to you more about what's going on today. So just to give a brief overview of the suffrage movement, there really were almost two separate suffrage movements between black and white women eventually. I mean, before there was a little bit of a huge divide, there were some black women and some white women who worked together on the suffrage movement, but it was part of an extension of the abolitionist movement. So it started before slavery ended, really like in the 1830s, and mostly in the northeast part of the country, Philadelphia, Boston, New York, where these women were working together to fight against slavery, and as an extension of that, to have women's rights. And then things kind of divided when it came to the 15th Amendment. After the Civil War ended, there were the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendments that were passed that gave rights to former slaves. And the 15th Amendment is what really kind of set the white women off who were involved in the suffrage movement, because it said the rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall be denied shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So that was the 15th Amendment that was passed only 5 years after the end of slavery, after the end of the Civil War, which gave black men the right to vote who were former slaves. And so the white women who had been involved in the suffrage movement for technically about 30 years or so, the tale is that it started in 1848 at this convention in Seneca Falls, New York. So a lot of them were infuriated by the idea of former slave men getting the right to vote before white women did. And so then they broke off into two different groups in their efforts to try to make sure that they could get the right to vote. They had different strategies. One strategy by the National Women's Suffrage Association, which was led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, was they wanted to have a national amendment. They wanted it to be the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. So they had a national focus. And then the American Women's Suffrage Association, which was headed by Lucy Stone, Henry Blackwell, and Julia Ward Howe. And Henry happened to be Lucy Stone's husband. She was a progressive woman at that time and even kept her own name. She didn't even hyphenate it. And so they decided to have a state-by-state approach, which in today's world, that's pretty much how equal marriage has passed in this country in our lifetime, and how the legalization of cannabis, weed or pot, has been passed in our lifetime, state by state. So they just kind of had different approaches. And the American Women's Suffrage Association was a little bit more welcoming to black women than the other association. So then, fast forward a few decades, and they decided to merge into the National American Women's Suffrage Association because they weren't getting the results that they wanted. And what their strategy was to incorporate Southern women into their efforts, welcome Southern women a little bit more than they had been involved. In order to do that, they decided to placate the Southern women and the Southern strategy by basically being extremely unwelcoming to black women. And that's where black women were like, okay, so we're just, we don't need to work with you people. And we're gonna just have our own separate thing. So again, staying on the white suffrage track, in 1913 there was a congressional union that was led by Alice Paul, and she's the one that kind of came up with the idea for the March on Washington, which was their way. What happened was that these women had actually traveled to England, and the British women were also fighting for the right to vote, and they were taking more radical approaches of having civil disobedience. So having marches and hunger strikes and different kinds of disruptive type of behavior. And so that by this time, 1913, people had been fighting for the right to vote for over almost 60 years at this point. So we're talking about a second generation of women who had been fighting. And so they were just tired of being nice. And then in 1916, they had the National Women's Party, which was also formed by Alice Paul. So what were black women doing? Black women, for the most part, and there are always exceptions, and trust me, I hear the exceptions, but for the most part, black women were fighting for the right to vote through the church track. After the Civil War, the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, surged, and black women were working within the church, as we do still today, right? As far as having civil and political kind of voice. And so within the church, black women were pushing to have more and more responsibility and to eventually become bishops and be in leadership positions within the church. And so then they decided to kind of take it outside of the church and have more rights outside. And so that was a different track than most of the white women had. In 1892, Colored Women's League was founded in Washington, D.C. 1895, the National Federation of Afro-American Women was founded in Boston. And the president was Margaret Murray Washington, who was Booker T. Washington's wife. And then all of these different club women from around the country, there were a lot of women's clubs during this time. Women were organized in this way because they didn't have the right to vote, they didn't have the right to own property, they didn't have the right to get a divorce, they didn't have hardly any of the rights that we have today. And so, in order to have some kind of power or control over their lives, they were organized into these women's groups in order to put pressure on the men in their lives, in order to have the men look out for their rights. So then in 1896, they decided to merge together and form one national organization, the National Association of Colored Women. My great-grandmother was one of the founders of that organization. And then she went on in 1913 to form the Alpha Suffrage Club in Chicago. So this is my great-grandmother. Ida Wells Barnett was her married name. She was an educator, a journalist, an anti-lynching crusader, newspaper editor and owner, civil rights activist, co-founder of the NAACP and the National Association of Colored Women, a suffragist. I just said she founded this Alpha Suffrage Club. She was a community organizer, social worker, fair housing advocate. As you can see, she was quite a slacker. And in her spare time, when she was bored, she decided to become a mother and a wife. And so this is her family, which actually is my family as well. So I think if this clicker works, this is my grandmother right here. My grandmother was the youngest child of 4 of Ida's children. Her husband, Ferdinand Barnett, right here, had 2 children from a previous marriage. So Ida, I don't know if you know this, but she was a stepmom. I don't think she was a stepmonster. I think she was a stepmom. And so this is my aunt, Ida Jr., and then their brother, my uncle, Herman, and then this is Charles, the oldest child. This is Ferdinand Jr., who was Ferdinand's son from his previous marriage, and this is Albert Barnett. And those who live in Chicago are familiar with Chicago or the Chicago Defender might know that Albert Barnett was a writer for the Chicago Defender. And so I don't know if he got that from Ida because he was, I think, around 11 when she became his stepmother. So he might have just already had that kind of talent as a journalist. So the way that my family is structured, because people always want to know this, is Ida had 4 children. Charles, her oldest child, had 1 child. His daughter had 5 children, so those 5 children are also great-grandchildren. And then my grandmother, Alfreda Barnett, married, I can't even remember my grandfather's name, Benjamin Duster. And then, so Alfreda and Benjamin had 5 children, and I am the child of her middle child. So this is how I'm on the family tree. So here's Ida. This is her youngest child, Alfreda Barnett. That's how I remember her looking. I never saw her when she had the big bow in her hair. And then this is my father, who was Alfreda's middle child, and this is me with my 2 brothers. So my grandmother had a total of 15 grandchildren. So if you do the math, there were a total of 20 great-grandchildren. There are 18 surviving now. So getting back to Black suffragists, I just put this together so that people can see the names of some Black suffragists, because for a lot of people, we hear Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott and some of these other women, and you never hear the names of Black women. So I just wanted to compile a short list of some of them so you can see their names. And then I pulled up some pictures so you can see what some of them look like as well, because I think it's nice to see a picture with a name and just to see how elegant and beautiful and sophisticated and fashionable these women were. So this is Anna Julia Cooper here. This is Elizabeth Piper Easley, Nannie Helen Burroughs, and this is Mary Talbert, who was the 2nd president of the National Association of Colored Women. So, as you all probably know, I'm going to assume you all know this. So this is just review. As I said, the right to vote for women came state by state for the most part until the amendment made it into the Constitution. And so, if you notice, Wyoming was actually the first state that gave women the right to vote. And I joke around and say that they gave women the right to vote in Wyoming because they wanted to bribe women to move there. Because there weren't a lot of women in Wyoming, and they're like, well, how can we get them here? Let's give them the right to vote, then they'll move. And there was different kinds of suffrage. There was full suffrage, which meant that women could vote in every election no matter what. And then there was presidential suffrage, which is completely bizarre to me, and I know people they don't care what my opinion is, but that was like women could vote in the presidential election, the President of the United States election, and then they could vote in municipal elections, but not statewide, which is like, I don't know why they came up with that idea. And then some women could vote in primary, and then none. So you all, Wisconsin, 1919, All right. So Illinois, we were a little bit ahead of you. Illinois, we got the right to vote in 1913, which is why my great-grandmother was able to form the Alpha Suffrage Club, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about what they did. So you guys got the right to vote 1 year before it became national. So, well, backtracking just a bit. So in the Alpha Suffrage Club, my great-grandmother founded it right after Illinois gave women the right to vote. And so she decided, okay, we have the right to vote, well, we need to roll our sleeves up and get busy canvassing people and registering people to vote. And so one of the first things that the organization did was send my great-grandmother to Washington to participate in this parade. So it was only a couple of months after, because it was in March. And so she was representing the Alpha Suffrage Club, and as was mentioned, black women were kindly requested to march in the back of the parade. And the thing is, with my great-grandmother, from what I understand, because I wasn't there, okay, but based on what I've read, the night before the parade, the Illinois delegates were practicing. They were in a rehearsal. And she had traveled with the Illinois delegation. In Illinois, white women and black women were working together as suffragists, even though she had her own club, but there were white women actually who were involved and helped her. And so she traveled with them. The Illinois delegation was practicing the night before the parade, you know, how just figuring out how you're going to line up, who's going to hold the flag, who's going to stand next to each other, all that kind of stuff. And then from what I understand, somebody came into the room where they were practicing and made this request, or made this announcement that black women needed to march in the back of the parade. And so the Illinois delegates were like, what are you talking about? I mean, we came here together, and there was a big commotion on, are we going to comply with this or not? Two of the women, white women, volunteered to march with Ida in the back of the parade, and they were just trying to figure out how to handle this. And basically, I know that some people think, I've seen this where that Ida marched with the Delta founders. That is not what happened. It's interesting how history kind of gets blurred and merged together. What really happened is that you have to remember, my great-grandmother was 51 years old in 1913, so I'm sure she probably looked at the Delta founders as her kids. I mean, they were her children's age. So I think her age is significant because she had already been fighting for justice for over 30 years. She was a grown woman, and having some other people tell her to be in the back, she was like, I don't know who you're talking to. Do you know who you're talking to? So she agreed to go in the back, and then the day of the parade, the white women who said they would march with her went into the back, and they couldn't find her, so it was panic, where's Ida? So then they didn't know what to do, so then they went up to the Illinois delegation, and what happened was that Ida walked alongside the sidewalk of the parade, along the parade path, and when she saw the Illinois delegation, she jumped out of the crowd and inserted herself right there, right in the middle of the Illinois delegation, front and center. So she was one of the few black women who integrated the parade. So today, here we are in 2020, everybody's so excited about the centennial of the 19th Amendment, and yay, women, we get the right to vote, look at what we did. But what I find interesting is how the story is simplified and watered down and whitewashed. And this is what I'm seeing, this is just a few. First of all, this conference that took place in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. The story goes, and I feel like it's a fairy tale at this point, you know, once upon a time, there was Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, and they decided to have a meeting in Seneca Falls, New York, where they could discuss how women could get the right to vote. Well, first of all, Susan B. Anthony wasn't there. Lucretia Mott was there. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott are the ones who organized this event. Lucretia Mott had spent time with the Seneca Native American tribe that is in the area of Seneca Falls, New York. The Native American tribe of the Seneca Nation were much more sort of egalitarian and slightly matriarchal kind of culture. And so Lucretia Mott got some of her ideas from the Seneca women, or just the Seneca culture, because it was very different than the white patriarchal Eurocentric kind of culture of this country at that time. They don't give any credit to the Seneca Nation women of influencing Lucretia Mott. Then, this is how, and this is very important, I think, for educators even today, is basically you have to be careful about first primary sources, because these women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who met in 1851, so we're talking 3 years after this conference, they decided to write a 6-volume history of women's suffrage in order to document the history of women in the suffrage movement. So they created their own narrative, the way they wanted the story to be told. And the problem today is that some people use these references as truth. But they kind of left out, black women, Native American women, Hispanic women, Asian women. They just sort of conveniently left it out. So it's history, but it's false narrative by omission. So we always need to be careful about the sources are. And then the other thing that I'm finding, and I know we're all going to be conscious to make sure to help people understand reality, is that not all women got the right to vote in 1920. So even though we're so happy that the 19th Amendment passed, it was white women who got the right to vote in 1920, not all women. So this is the reality. 1920, white women got the right to vote. Native American women, technically, and I was talking to a Native American woman just a couple of months ago, and she's saying that, still, the reality is still today in 2020, all women of every persuasion doesn't have the right to vote because of all the gerrymandering and all of the voter suppression and all of that. Okay, but technically, in 1924, Native American got the right to vote because of the Indian Citizenship Act. Does anybody find that ironic? That Native Americans were not considered citizens until 1924 in the country that they were in before, when Columbus got lost. Then, 1943, Chinese American women were considered citizens through the Magnuson Act. This is all a matter of becoming citizens, full citizens. Then 1952, Japanese American women from the McCarran-Walker Act. And then 45 years later, African American women finally get the right to vote in reality. Now, on paper, you could say, yeah, we got the right to vote in 1920. But the reality, south of the Mason-Dixon line, and we all have heard of Fannie Lou Hamer, is one of the more famous suffragists who was way after 1920 fighting for the right to vote. So the realities are not that simple of just 1920 rah-rah. So now I'm going to focus, switch gears on today and this progression of how we're going to tell the story of suffrage movement. So this is the start of recognizing suffragists in monument form. In 1921, a statue or a monument was created that had Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott as, I guess, the founders, the mothers of the suffrage movement. And then there's this fourth mound that's unfinished, I guess, to represent the unfinished work. It was put into the Capitol Rotunda on February 15, 1921, and then the very next day, it was put into a crypt in the basement of the Capitol, and it was removed in 1997. So over 70 years, it was just collecting dust. But still, what is up with this? Okay, so that was in 1921. Now fast forward to, I was trying to find any statues or monuments of black suffragists anywhere. And I just found Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman are recognized. And you can see they have several statues. But I don't know, I haven't seen any of these, so I'm not sure how much they recognize their involvement in the suffrage movement as much as some of the other work that they were doing. So I'm going to cover the efforts that are taking place in New York City, Washington, D.C., the whole state of Tennessee, and then Fairfax County, Virginia, and what's happening in Chicago. So, before I get to New York City, I have to tell you a story. Once upon a time, there was a park called Central Park in New York City. New York City Central Park currently in 2020 has 23 statues, and 0 of those statues are women, are real women. There's a statue of like the goddess of victory. You know those statues, the statues that don't have a head, those kind of statues of women. There's a statue of a dog in Central Park, but there's not one, as of right this minute, statue of real women in Central Park. So a group of women decided that a committee was formed to change that and have the very first statue of a real woman placed in Central Park. And they decided to make it a monument to suffragists. And I was contacted by one of the committee members saying that Ida B. Wells was going to be included in this suffrage monument in Central Park. So I was super excited, and I thought that was very progressive. And then this is the design that they came up with. Okay, look at that. Where's Ida? So what they have, this is the design they came up with versus, I'm not sure which one is Elizabeth Cady Stanton and which one is Susan B. Anthony, because all the pictures I've ever seen of them, they look way older than this. So I don't know. And then, so they have a scroll coming down to a ballot box. And then the wording on here says, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, Women's Suffrage Movement Monument. And so we saw. Okay, so I was like, what? Women's Suffrage Movement Monument with 2 women. And then I asked, because I actually got on the phone with one of these women, and I was like, I saw the design, and I am not understanding where Ida is. Maybe I just can't see something. And so she told me, well, she's listed on the scroll. This scroll. And they're like, there are 22 women listed on this scroll, along with, they said there was going to be a timeline and some chronological information about the 72-year history of the suffrage movement. And I was kind of like thinking, people ask me all the time, what would your great-grandmother think about this? What would you, about all kinds of things? And I'm like, so I'm thinking to myself, what would my great-grandmother think about her name being written on a scroll that's going to the ground? And on a pedestal are 2 white women. This is what I was thinking about, and I'm like, I'm not sure if she would think that's an honor. And then, so they said 7 African-American women would be listed, 1 Hispanic and 1 Chinese. And then I asked the lady, well, just think 100 years from now. If somebody looks at that scroll, which who knows if they're going to actually read it, if they look at it, are they going to know that any of those women were African-American by reading their names? And I personally think it's important to see visuals, especially since we are so invisible in so many places. So luckily I wasn't the only one who kind of wondered about this, and there was a lot of pushback on social media. I don't know if any of you were tracking this, but Brent Staples from the New York Times was extremely vocal. And so I guess there were a number of people, so then they, I guess, came up with another suggestion, which was, look at the difference. Do you see the difference? No scroll. And they changed the wording to say Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, women's rights pioneers. So I was like, okay, well, I'm working on a monument in Chicago to Ida B. Wells, and I'm like, okay, it's fine to create a monument to one person or two people, but don't have them represent a whole movement, because that's ridiculous, because it was an over 70-year battle with thousands of women. So if you want to create a monument to two women, that's fine. I actually talked to them, and I was like, please change the wording to just about them. And that's what you want to do. So then some other people had questions about it, and this is the third and final design that they have settled on, and this is it. Don't you love this? They put in Sojourner Truth right here. So I actually talked to the woman who's the president of this committee. I talked to her this week, and I was asking her, is this sculpture idea based on a photograph? Because think about the time frame that this was happening. In real life, did Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Sojourner Truth sit at a table together in equality as equals? Did this happen? Or is this something that you just created license in order to make it seem like it was just one big happy family? So she told me that they did not create this based on a photograph. So, there you go. Meanwhile, there are some other people who have different concepts of how to represent the suffrage movement in monument form. Jane DeDecker is a Colorado-based artist, and I actually have met with her in person as well, because she had an idea that was getting a little bit of pushback, and she wanted to ask my opinion about it. So her idea is to create a monument that includes Elizabeth Cady Stanton, her daughter Harriet Stanton Blanche, Susan B. Anthony, Sojourner Truth, Alice Paul, and Ida B. Wells. Her idea is multi-generational and it's multiracial. Because the reality is the suffrage movement probably took place over 3 generations, maybe 70 years, depending on when you have kids. You know, it could be 2 or 3 generations. And then she wanted to have another component that sort of told a narrative and also includes a whole lot more names. So I was like, that sounds interesting. So this is what she came up with. Now, the idea is that, her idea is that it's like a water drop, like you imagine water dropping, and then there's ripples that go out, that, you know, from a water drop, the ripples go out. And so these rings represent the ripples. So her idea is that, and I think it kind of works, you know, where these were the pioneers, but then there's a ripple effect to generations and generations after them. And there would be names, this is the clay model. There would be names around the rings. So then, this is the cool thing, is that this little one up at the top with the flag is Ida. I'm like, yeah, she's at the top. So she actually, this woman, now you have to understand, okay, as the great-granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, I get, people talk to me a lot about ideas that they have regarding different projects and things like that. And so if you've lived with this your whole life, after a while you're kind of like, oh, that's a nice idea. Okay, let's see what happens. Because a lot of people have ideas and then that, you know, the next minute they forget about it. So she tells me she's going to do this and have it placed in Washington, D.C., and it would require a federal act of Congress in order to get this installed in Washington, D.C. And I'm listening to her and I'm like, sure you're going to do that. This woman actually got a smaller model of this same concept installed in Little Rock, Arkansas. This just in October 2019. And you can see it's a slightly different idea because she has the names along the bottom instead of like the ringlets. But you see, this is Ida's name right here. And to me, my personal opinion is that this is more inclusive. to tell the story of the suffrage movement, to have multiple names and more than 2 or 3 people, or especially 2 or 3 people who didn't really in real life work together, represented. So, moving on to Tennessee, the entire state of Tennessee is creating a suffrage trail. And I am using them as a case study. I'm watching what they're doing because I am going to be on the legislators in Illinois I want to try to get something like this done in Illinois because this is just amazing to me what they're doing. And I find this particularly ironic because Illinois was the first state to ratify the 19th Amendment. Tennessee was the last. And they only ratified it by 1 vote of, I forgot the guy's name, I should remember it, so we should all remember this guy's name, but it was by 1 vote by a man who was told by his mother that he needed to vote for it. Because he was young, he was like 26 years old or something. So I'm like, how in the world is the state that was the last state to ratify the 19th Amendment the most progressive when it comes to honoring their suffragists? So I think this is making up for lost time. So they've created this suffrage trail, which includes the historical markers, monuments, memorials, plaques, bus tours, statues, and grave sites. So these are just some pictures of different components of their suffrage trail. So the markers, you have statues, busts, plaques, and then they've created one monument, and you see this is in 2006, so they're way ahead of the game. In Knoxville of 3 women, and do you notice there's writing on the base of the statue? Can you imagine what a novel idea to tell information in a textual form on a base of a monument. Then, from this point forward, I've highlighted black women because I want to know how many black women are being represented. So in Nashville, in 2016, they created a monument. And again, these are all Tennessee suffragists, and you see there's 1 black woman represented. And this is what it looks like in the Centennial Park. I haven't seen it in person, but I want to see it. I want to go on this whole trail. Then in Memphis, there's a monument that's currently being created. It should be unveiled on April 24th. This is the last date I was told. So if any of you want to take a road trip down to Memphis, this is really the most comprehensive so far because it includes 13 different women, and you see there are 5 that are black, including my great-grandmother. And then I was contacted by the woman who's really the force behind this happening. She told me what they were doing, and I was given the honor to write the text that will be included on the monument. There's like a short bio of Ida, and this is what the monument will look like. This is amazing. It's going to have these walls. It's going to be a glass wall, and these etchings on the wall, and then these images, and then you can see the text is going to be there, and then 6 different busts. And this is a close-up of the bust that's being created of Ida. And the artist is the same one who did all 3 of these monuments in Tennessee. It's, like I said, April 24th, if you want to go down there. And then I have all the websites if you want to look at and just make sure that they're updated as far, because they've changed the date 3 times so far on when this is going to be unveiled. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll be April. Next, Fairfax County, Virginia. They're creating a memorial. This, to me, this is way more extensive than a monument or a statue. This almost looks like an institution that's being created. And it's going on the land where the Occoquan workhouse was. Back in 1913, with Alice Paul, when they started all this more disruptive kind of way of fighting for the right to vote, they were doing hunger strikes, and that's with the parade and doing all this disruptive kind of work. Well, a lot of these women were arrested. They were chaining themselves to fences. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie Iron-Clawed Angels, that is what was captured in that movie. Well, the Occoquan workhouse is where they were imprisoned and force-fed and just really kind of brutalized. On that land is where this monument is going to go, this memorial park, really. And I just stole pictures from their website of drawings of what it's going to look like. And you see this is way bigger than a monument or a statue. They're going to have all these like different stations where you can walk around and learn information, and it's just, I've only seen the drawings, but I was contacted also about this, and this is going to be opened on August 26th this year, if any of you still want to take a road trip. That is going to happen. That's a set date. So just to give a perspective of, a lot of people know about my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, and I want to help you understand, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's a goof that people know who she is. It's not by magic, fairy dust, that people know who she is. It takes advocacy for people to be remembered. And I'm just going to show you a little bit about, I'm going to give my family credit for at least helping people know enough about her so that we can pass the baton on to the general public. So it started with my grandmother. Now, my great-grandmother, Ida, died in 1931. My grandmother, her youngest child, found her manuscript of her autobiography that she was not able to finish before she died, and took 39 years to edit and publish her mother's work. Now that, to me, is a true testimony of tenacity. To spend 40 years, not 40 years, 8 hours a day, every day, no. My grandmother had 5 children. So those of you who have children know that you're working, in the margins when the kids are asleep or whatever. But she did it, and then she told me that it took a while after she got it done to get it published, because she finished it in the 1960s. Now imagine trying to get a book published about a militant, radical, black woman in the 1960s. So a lot of publishers were really scared to do that. So it took a while, and finally University of Chicago got brave enough to do it. This is what the first cover looked like. It was part of the Negro American biography series with John Hope Franklin as the editor. So that's my grandmother, what she did. Then my father's generation, the 5 of them decided in 1988 to start the Ida B. Wells Memorial Foundation. And the purpose was to protect, promote, and to promote the legacy of my great-grandmother. And they at first had journalism awards, but then my generation has grown, and we decided we wanted to do a little bit more. My father's generation has worked very closely with the Ida B. Wells Barnett Museum, which hosts the Ida B. Wells birthday celebration around her birthday, July 16th, every year. And then my father's generation, worked very closely with William Greaves on the documentary film, Ida B. Wells, A Passion for Justice, which came out in 1989. They worked with him as far as supplying the information. I actually worked on the film. I was in film school at the time, so I actually worked on the film crew. And then my father's generation worked very closely with Paula Giddings, yours O'Rourke, on the very small 800-page book of Ida B. Wells that only took her 25 years to work on that book. But my father's generation supplied her a lot of information and provided a lot of support for her to get that done. And then, so now my generation, my brothers and I, are working on the foundation. So we're 3 generations after my great-grandmother to make sure that people remember her. So this is the second cover of her autobiography that came out in 1991, the second cover of it. And then just a month from now, on April 22nd, her autobiography, the second edition, is coming out. And I had the honor also of writing the afterword for that book, which is amazing to me because that would be 3 generations of my family in one book. Because obviously I wrote the book, and then my grandmother wrote the introduction and edited it, and then I wrote the afterword to give perspective of what's happened after my grandmother died, what our family has done. This is some of the people in my family, just a few of us. I don't know how many cousins I have, because about every other month or so, there's somebody else born. So there's just a lot of us. We also created a monument or a marker to recognize Ida's parents. In Holly Springs, this is in Holly Springs, which is her hometown. And this is what the museum looks like. It's a house museum, which is actually on the land where Ida was born. Now, you know she was not born in that house because she was born into slavery. So people get mad at me when I say it, but she had to have been born in the slave quarters, okay? She was not born in this house. But that is the house where her mother worked as a cook. Her father was a carpenter, and now we have it. Ha ha. So this is a sign on the Highway 78. If any of you go from Memphis down to Mississippi, I think you can go all the way to Jackson on Highway 78. It's a major highway, and if people are going to see Elvis, the Some People's King of rock and roll, then they have to pass by Holly Springs in order to get to Tupelo. And I was really a pain to all of the state legislators in Mississippi, because I was like, you have to have a sign on the highway that indicates this is Ida's hometown. They are passing where Ida was, because in my opinion, Elvis was an entertainer, Ida was a warrior, and people should know. This is a marker that's in Memphis on Beale Street, and then this is the heritage stamp that came out in 1990, the 25-cent stamp. This marker was just placed this past July in Holly Springs in the town square. I'm going to say that again. This past July of 2019, her hometown decided to recognize her. Now, Memphis, which was not her hometown, recognized her decades ago. So it's funny how that goes a lot of times, and this is very common. It's like the people that know you the most are the ones who take you for granted, and then when people all around start recognizing you, then all of a sudden it's like, hey, hold up, she's a homegirl, she's from here. So, you know, this is what happens. So she got her marker in the town square, and this is my brother. He is single. People ask me, like the last time I did it, like, is your brother married? He's kind of cute. He's not married, but he's well. This is the Mississippi Writers Trail recognized her last year also. That's the marker. And they placed that at Ross College, which is her alma mater. Okay. So just going to quickly go through some of the current efforts. Okay, so these are the books that I created. I worked with the aldermen to have a marker placed to recognize, remember the Ivy Wells Homes. It was a housing community that stood for 60 years in Chicago. That's what it looks like. And this is what the marker looks like. There's not one brick of that housing community left. But you can see there's a drawing of the housing community there. And then I got an honorary street name also. There's the Ida Track Walk in Chicago, which this is some pictures of people. And then today, actually, there's a street naming in honor of Ida in Brooklyn, because she lived there for about a year. And then next week, there's going to be a scholarship fund at UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago, in her name. So these are some of the other honors that have taken place around the country. Ida B's table was created in 2017 in Baltimore, which has her as a theme. And that's what some of it looks like. And then I'm just going to tell you, we were in the Rose Bowl parade for the Suffragists float. And I was one of 5 descendants of suffragists who was on the float. And can you see me? I'm right here somewhere, right there. That's the float. And you see, if you remember the picture of the suffrage parade, these people were dressed in the period clothing in honor of that. And then we are the descendants. This is the descendant of Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and then me. So these are some more honors, and this is what we need to do to make sure that women are recognized in monument form. This is an example of several women being recognized in a public space in Virginia. And this is why I think that it is important to have these kind of public tributes to women, because spaces matter. This is an example of Susan B. Anthony and Ida B. Wells' gravestones. People go to the cemeteries in order to place their I voted stickers. And so to me that shows that it means something. You have to have spaces in order for people to be able to honor and be inspired by those who came before us. And again, I love this little girl's expression on her face, because to me this is what it's all about. When you have pictures, images, tributes to women in public spaces, then little girls can look at people who look like them and feel like they can do it too. And then I like this picture of the man because he can actually be inspired by a woman. All right. So thank you very much, and hopefully we all will do what we can to make sure that women get more recognition for what we have contributed to this country.
Thank you, Ms. Buster. We only have about 3 minutes for 1 or 2 questions. We have about a few minutes left, so we're only going to take 1 or 2 questions. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Ms. Duster. Thank you very much for coming today. Really enjoyed the presentation, all the information that you shared. You've done a lot, and so has your family. Out of all of the things that you've done, what would you say is your greatest achievement, and what would you like for us to remember as part of your legacy for what you've done for your grandmother, great-grandmother?
Well, so far out of the things that I've done, I feel that, I think I forgot to put it in there, is the Ida B. Wells Drive in Chicago. Getting that street name was a big deal. It's the first street in Chicago, in downtown Chicago, ever in the history of the city to be named after any woman or any person of color. The first, and it was done in 2018. I think that's really important because it's a major street. It's three lanes going each direction, and it feeds into 2 interstates. So even on the interstate, on I-94, you'll see signs for Ida B. Wells Drive. And so I think that gives her huge visibility. But for me, what I'm doing, in my opinion, and I know some people are like, well, that doesn't make sense, but for the way I look at what I'm doing is not only about honoring my own great-grandmother. This is about honoring Black women. And she is one. And I figure I might as well start with my family. But I'm not going to end with my family. I want to continue on and give other women recognition and visibility.
Thank you. 1 more question? So before I try to do, thank you, Ms. Dustin.
Where?
We got 1 more?
Right.
Hello, and thank you once again for blessing us with that speech. Real quick, as an African American male and also a father of 2 girls, what can I do, and also, my brothers, cousins, and little boys, and also men out here do to continuously support, Black African American women going forward in the country?
I think just basically validating, girls, women, as far as, as a father, just encouraging your daughters to be everything they can be, just to believe in themselves and believe in their own beauty. We live in a society and a culture that still struggles, I think, to recognize all of our diversity as far as how we physically look. And I mean, just with these Crown legislation that's going on, like we actually need laws to wear our hair in its natural state. I mean, what does that say about our culture? So I think there's still a struggle, you know, for girls, and I mean, we ask specifically about girls, to feel beautiful and to feel included and welcomed, and to believe that they can be everything that they want to be. So I would just, you know, try to have self-love as an encouragement.
We have another question.
Okay, and that will be the last question.
Hello. Not just a question, but when we look at the suffrage movement and the exclusion, but now we look at the inclusion as today as we celebrate, how do we move forward to look at the connections that we have now in comparison to the separation of yesterday? And we're looking at the celebration that we're having now with everyone being a part, white women and the black women moving forward.
Honestly, I think there is still a little bit of a struggle with total inclusion and recognition. I mean, I wrote an article about the similarities between the suffrage movement and the Women's March of 2017, well actually 2018, when there was an effort to demand that Tamika Mallory, who was one of the founders or one of the main organizers of the Women's March, people were demanding that she step down, and because there's this idea, and I'm sure there's some people in this room who have encountered this, where in order for black women to get things done, white women need to feel comfortable. And in making white women feel comfortable, what is requested of black women is to not be our authentic selves. And so, in my opinion, we're still moving towards that inclusion. But in order for us to be truly included, we have to be truly accepted for all that we are.
Thank you, Ms. Duster. Thank you. And Ms. Duster, I just want to say I'm humbled to be in your presence as the great-granddaughter of our sorority sister, Miss Ida B. Wells. So just the fact that you decided to come to our part of town to spend some quality time with us, I say thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and I am Dr. Golda Delano. I am a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and a sister of Miss Ida B. Wells. So thank you. Our sorority sister, Miss Ida B. Wells, dogged by racism and sexism, had the courage, like Delta women do, to stand tall and combat institutional prejudices. As a black woman, during her time, going way back to the 1800s, she was overlooked, devalued, exploited, underestimated, marginalized, and made to feel invisible. That was in, I thought, 1800s. Fast forward to 2020. Black women are still overlooked, undervalued, exploited, underestimated. Fast forward to today. Black women are still fighting for their rights. They're still fighting for access to quality health care. They're still fighting for a right to have a political voice. They're still fighting just to be able to register to vote. 2020, voter suppression. Miss Ida B. Wells' reality, Miss Sojourner's reality, Miss Shirley Chisholm's reality, that was there, we thought. Fast forward to today. Stacey Abrams' reality. Kamala Harris' reality. Jalen Calloway's reality. Fast forward to today. We thank you for coming here to listen to our past story. But we ask you to stand with us and disrupt these realities. We ask you to make it right. Miss Ida B. Wells said, the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. We thank you for coming. We thank you for sitting through and listening about our realities. But we ask you to act on our behalf. Thank you. Now I'm going to ask Janine Roberts, President of League of Women Voters, to come forward to wrap up with us. And as she comes forward, we have somebody who left a pair of glasses in the bathroom. So I'm going to leave it over there by the table. If this is yours, please go over by the table and pick it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for being here. I am honored to be on the stage with the fabulous women who have come before me. Our goal this year as a Centennial Committee was to celebrate all women, and especially to highlight the women who have been left out of the history books. For those of you who missed our December program, we do have a video of that, and the program was regarding the influence of the Indigenous women on the women's suffrage movement. We have other programs that we are sponsoring and other programs around the Fox Valley. At the Fox Valley Unitarian Universalist on March 8th, there's an International Day of Women. March 14th, Women's Suffrage Centennial at the library. March 19th, by AAUW, the 11th Annual Middle School Essay Contest, Influential Women in STEM. March 22nd, the Fox Valley Week of Women. Our next program will be on Women's Equality Day, which is the actual 100th anniversary of the signing of the 19th Amendment into law. We must remember, as Michelle told us, however, that true suffrage did not occur until the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and voter suppression has returned in force since the gutting of that act. The coalition also has outreach opportunities. A speakers bureau is available to speak to organizations of any size. The traveling exhibit that's in the hallway is available for short-term display at various locations. And we have also developed an educational toolkit with age-appropriate materials about the women's suffrage movement and the importance of the right to vote for both the elementary and secondary students. And this can be downloaded. And for more information on all of these things, you can go to our website or like us on Facebook. Of course, the best way to honor all of the women who fought for your right to vote is to actually go out and vote. Vote at the April 7th spring election, the August 11th partisan primary, and the November 3rd general election, and all of the elections in the 4 years between the presidential elections. And tell your friends to vote. And tell your kids to vote. And tell your parents and your grandparents and your cousins and anyone else who you love, tell them to vote. If you're not registered, and you're interested in finding out how to register, stop at the League of Women Voters table in the back of the room and we will help you. And again, thank you, Ms. Duster. We're honored to have you here. Thank you to all of the members of Delta Sigma Theta. We're honored to have you collaborate with us on this year-long adventure. And Karen Nelson, Diversity Coordinator for the City of Appleton.
At this time, I'd like to bring up Janine Calloway, Chapter President of NUAC, and our speaker, Michelle Duster. Would you please join us on the stage? We are so honored that this has been a year-long project in its formation. You are here intentionally because we have studied for over a year the reality of exclusion, and so you are intentionally here, and we are so appreciative of all of the hard work that has gone on before, and so together, collectively, with the League of Women Voters, President flanked on my left, and my chapter president of Delta Sigma Theta on my right, we present to you this special gift and token of our appreciation. This is a good time for your picture.